Okay, so this is part 2 of my episode 8 rewatch. If you haven't seen part 1, I definitely recommend doing that because these definitely all need to be watched in sequence. There's a lot of stuff here, there just is. And just like I said in the first part, this episode is heavy. It's not easy to get through. In that first part, I have like a full disclaimer and I talk about how I'm splitting this episode up and also that I'm not going to be talking specifically about the outing itself. So if you're looking for that, not the person to go to. Just like in part 1, I have the same links that I had there in this description. So there are some support resources for LGBTQ plus community members. And there's also a link to a Reddit thread that has like a bunch of discussions about this episode. So if you want some more opinions, you can definitely check that out as well. Evacuality's Tumblr link, it's also still going to be linked in the description because they helped me the entire time. Like, I can't not give them credit for all of the amazing stuff that we talked about. With that, let's get into this part. So like I mentioned at the very end of the last part, it's so weird that Mateo texts Hans on Monday and they don't actually get together to talk until Wednesday. This is definitely where the pacing issues start to become more obvious and you start to kind of pick up on it. Like, wait, when did he text Hans? Because it couldn't have possibly have been 2 days ago, right? It was 2 days ago. And I could only imagine that all of these pacing issues were just exacerbated even more if you were watching this in real time, which is a huge problem for a Scum series. You know, you have to not only make sure that the pacing makes sense when people binge watch it after the season is over, but it especially has to make sense when people are watching it in real time and waiting for clips every single day. I think Aristotle said that, right? Or was it Plato? I don't remember. I do appreciate that this episode tries to keep things kind of light because it definitely needs it. It needs some balance. Also, I'm pretty sure that is the widest we have ever seen and will ever see Mateo's eyes. Yes. Okay. So this is more of Mateo's ignorance being brought to the surface. We know that he doesn't really know too much about the community. He's very new to it, but even before then, he didn't really know too much about it. And Mateo's like visceral reaction to his mistake really drives home what I was saying in the first part about how Mateo is terrified of saying something wrong with David. He does not want to hurt David. It is his logic, I think, his main logic for not contacting David. And I do think that whether it works well or not, whether it could have been done better or not, Mateo's anxiety makes a lot of sense, not just for his character, but how like he has specifically acted in this season. You could consider this either the third or the fourth time that Mateo has said or done something ignorant in this season. The first was in the Dancing Girls clip when he asked, you know, why does the dancing teacher have to be so gay? Like, it was so obvious, whatever. And then in episode 5, he tells Hans that he's not that kind of gay. You could consider, in the first clip of this episode, he starts to say something ignorant to David, but David corrects him. So that's why I said this is either the third or fourth time, because whether you consider that or not. And then this would be the last time he outs David to Hans. Thankfully, in at least a private space and to someone who knows that this was a bad thing for him to do, so obviously Hans isn't going to go and spread that information like some other characters we know. But it's really good that Hans called him out for this. It's really good that Mateo has a queer like mentor. I know the whole like gay guru thing is a joke in Scum, but I mean, it is really nice that Mateo has someone who is also queer to kind of come to for issues surrounding the community and questions surrounding it. So I really, really like that. I think a lot of people were really excited and happy to see that even with all of the flaws of this episode, they still really took this part very seriously. Although I'm not going to get into what I think about the outing and talk about hypotheticals of what could have been in place of the outing. I'm just going to kind of take the outing as it is. I do think that the aftermath of it is done pretty well. I think it's treated with a level of respect, and parts of the build up to it are also treated with that same respect and care, like this. But in all, I think the lead up is the main issue. Okay, so this part brings up some ideas that Evacuality and I had about how to fix this episode, which I will be speaking mostly about in the next part. But I just want to mention this for now because I'll probably refer back to it in that part. Mateo doesn't know if David takes hormones. He says he thinks so, but we didn't see him ask David that, so I'm sure he's just going off of what he's read on Google and what he assumes. And then Hans goes on to say that he doesn't know that much about it and he thinks that the treatment isn't easy. But he's also not an expert on it. He's cis. The experts on it would be the actual trans people. And in this case, the actual trans character, who is David. So the way that they set up both Hans's and Mateo's uncertainty about David and about the trans community, I feel like gave Druck an opportunity to let David fill in those blanks, but then they didn't use that opportunity to its full potential. One of the main ways that I would fix this episode is having David talk more about his experiences as a trans man. I think it would have been really cool to have a parallel conversation to this one, but with Mateo and David. So this Q&A could have mostly focused on how Mateo feels when he's around David, which is what Hans is going to get into right after this. And then the one with David and Mateo could actually focus on a little bit more education surrounding trans issues and struggles. And filling in the blanks that are obviously left here. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty in how both of them are speaking right now. And who better to fill those in than David if he's comfortable with it. And I am assuming that they would have made David be a little bit comfortable with it because Lucas himself was very comfortable talking about this stuff, and that is partially the reason why they decided to go down this road with the character. So I also want to put that out there, that no marginalized group has an obligation to educate non-marginalized groups. But if education was a big part of what they wanted to do with this episode and with the outing storyline, which Lucas has been cited saying that that is partially the reason, then I think it would have been a good idea to have had David talk more about it and be a little bit comfortable talking to Mateo about some questions that he might have. That's just like a little sneak peek of some stuff that I'm really going to get more into in part 3, but I think it's another strange thing that Druck does, another strange groundwork that they laid but then didn't do anything with, or didn't do the most that they could have. Really, really glad that they brought that up, because I'm sure that's what a lot of ignorant viewers would be saying to themselves at this moment. Like, oh wait, does that make Mateo not gay anymore? What does that mean? Is this not like the gay season now? So I'm glad that they directly addressed that, and they weren't afraid to call it out and be like, no, he's definitely still gay. Definitely still gay. And this also goes with something that I mentioned in episode 7 about how Mateo is actually more secure about his sexuality than a lot of the other Esocs were. He mentions it twice in 2 different instances in episode 7. When he comes out to the guys, he says, I am into men. He says that specifically. And then a couple of clips later, he makes a joke about him being the gay one. So they do put in these little hints about Mateo being gay, and specifically referring to Mateo as gay before this conversation, which I think is really well done. And this brings up another element of why Mateo doesn't contact David as soon as he should. So first is the anxiety of saying something wrong and being ignorant. But then I also think that Mateo has been really in his head about the labels and about the boxes. Because he is very new to accepting his own identity. This community is something that is very new to him, and he's thinking of everything very black and white. He's thinking of everything in terms of the labels, and that's it. He has focused his thought process on David and their relationship on the labels rather than his feelings. And those are the most important thing, which is what Hans is going to remind him of in the next couple of minutes. Mateo is definitely the kind of person to overthink things and to make things more complicated than they need to be in his own head and to ruminate on things. And I think that this right here reveals that he has been ruminating on these labels for the past couple of days, which has also made it difficult for him to contact David, along with those anxieties of ignorance. That question is so weird, or it was so weird to me at first, because Hans's question is very clear. Like, what do you fancy about him? Why would you need more clarification on that? It seems like a very direct question. But Matteo is like, wait, like, what do you mean? And I think that shows you even further that Matteo is kind of taken aback that Hans would even ask that, you know, because he's been so focused on the labels, the labels, the labels. What does it mean? What does this mean for me, for my newly formed identity? And Hans reframing his thought process to focus more on his own feelings takes Matteo a little bit by surprise. He's like, wait, what? There's another way to think about this? I love this part. Okay, so the music, you can hear it change to kind of sound like a music box. It's very delicate and like twinkly. And I think it fits so well for what Matteo is probably thinking right now. He's reminiscing about David and he's thinking about David, and you can see on his face and through his body language as he starts talking that he's kind of in a little bit of a lovesick daze. He like throws his head back and he looks just so lovesick in an instant. It takes him 2 seconds to just be overwhelmed by all of these wonderful feelings that he feels when he thinks about David. And another thing, before I actually talk about what he says about David, which I do want to go through like each thing that he says, but before that, I want to notice how, as he talks, Matteo has a little bit of trouble maintaining eye contact with Hans, which could be like a whole other conversation on its own, because there are some very interesting issues with eye contact with Matteo throughout the season. But this one specifically, just taking it in a vacuum, I think you could interpret it as Matteo not really being used to expressing these very soft sentiments about people. He's still very used to opening up at all. So it's a little bit awkward for him to talk about these very intimate personal feelings. And even in the last time that he talked about David, which was at the end of episode 6 with Jonas, he also had some difficulty making eye contact with him as well. And another connection to that clip is his tone, which is very delicate and very soft in both of those clips. Whenever he talks about David with someone, his voice gets very delicate. That's the best way, I think, to describe it.
Das war richtig schön. So einfach. Wir haben uns richtig gut verstanden. Es ist einfach wunderschön mit ihm.
So going through each bullet point that Matteo cites for liking David, the first one is his smile, which I think is a great way to start. This is a great jumping off point for Matteo because it's not like super deep, so it's a good way for him to kind of ease into this conversation and ease into the deeper reasons why he likes David. And also in the grand scheme of physical traits, I think this is the least physical trait he could have cited, because to me, when I say that I love someone's smile, it's not just that I like how it looks, it's that I like seeing that person expressing happiness. Maybe that's just me, but I think it's really sweet that that is the first thing he says, it's the only physical thing he says, and it really can be taken also in a deeper way as well. So that's the second thing. We've gone into some deeper territory, definitely. So I've been talking about this running theme of Matteo and David understanding each other since the beginning of the season. Going back to their very first conversation, there was a level of intimate understanding there. And then as they got to know each other even more, that understanding deepened and deepened, but it was always unspoken. It always kind of seemed like they just kind of knew how to be around each other and how to approach certain things with one another. And that unspoken connection between the two of them has been such a big part of this season. And I think the two best examples of it are in episode 3, when David stays over to clean up after the party, and after Mateo has his panic attack, David kind of pushes a little bit, but he really gives Mateo the room to open up. He takes a little bit more initiative than we had seen him take before, and he just knows how to handle this situation. And then in episode 4, a similar thing happens where after they take off on their bikes to ditch Abdi's party, Mateo really sinks into himself a little bit. He gets a lot less active, he gets pretty nervous, and David realizes this, acknowledges it in an unspoken way, and goes along with it. And he takes the reins and he's totally okay with that, and it works. And they never speak about it directly. It all just kind of flows. And I think it really is all leading up to this. Mateo saying that one of the main reasons why he likes David is because he feels understood when he's around him. I really think that this is the crux of what Mateo likes about David. I do. And then the last thing he says is that it's really beautiful with him. And he used that same adjective back in episode 6. Like I said before, there are parallels to that clip and to this one. He uses the same adjective, and he says it in kind of a similar way as well. So that's really sweet. So Druck does show us that this conversation sinks in for Mateo a bit. This conversation is really important for Mateo and for his process, but they show us that through a text conversation, which I know most, if not everyone who was watching this in real time was also following like the text conversations too. But I feel like Mateo texting David what he did and when he did was too important to have just as like a supplementary material kind of thing. I think it really should have been tacked on to the end of this clip. Mateo letting David know that he's not going to bail on him. And it does come 2 hours after this clip. So it is because of this conversation that they have, or at least in part. And I think it's too important for them to have just made it a separate text message. I don't really know why they did that. Once again, I'll talk more about this in the next part. This is just me plugging the third part for 20 minutes. I haven't talked about any music in this episode so far, and I'm pretty sure this is the only one that I'm gonna cite any lyrics for. So it's called Going Home. I'm gonna try to pronounce this artist's name, but I'll also leave it up here. I think it's Auskid. And the lyrics that I want to talk about are: home, I'm making my way home, my mind's already there. Long is the path ahead, and though my body tires and I have far to go, I know I'm going home. I mentioned this kind of briefly in, I think, the second clip, but I do think that there is a parallel between Mateo working up to calling David and also Mateo working up to tell his mom about David. So home, in the sense of this song and in the sense of these lyrics, could refer to both of them. So when the song says that they're making their way home, I think if we're using that to talk about Mateo's experience and his journey with both David and his mom, he has made some progress in both realms, right? In the beginning of the episode, he couldn't really speak to either one of them, but right before this clip, he texts David, and in this clip, he calls his mom. So we have some progress. He is making his way home. But then saying that he still has far to go could definitely reference how he still has work to do. He definitely still has work to do. Because even though he has texted David, there was still uncertainty there. And even though he does call his mom in this clip, he still doesn't really open up to her in the way that he wants to. He doesn't really say much of substance at all. And then the lyric, my mind is already there, is really fascinating. And I'm kind of reading that as the fact that Mateo knows what he needs to do, and he knows that everything with his mom is going to be fine, even if it isn't at first, it will be eventually, right? And he also knows that he loves David, and that things are also going to be fine with David. But because of these anxieties and these irrational fears that he has been having throughout this entire episode, he still hasn't gotten there yet. He still hasn't gotten to the place where his mind knows he should be. I love this set piece so much. Mateo walking through this little maze of trees is a great way to symbolize how he's still kind of lost as he's trying to get home, as he's trying to figure out how to communicate with these two really important people in his life. And he's pacing the entire time that he calls his mom, which is not only very relatable for people who have anxiety, but it also creates a really cool visual representation of that anxiety because he's walking through these trees. As Mateo starts to talk to his mom, he weaves through the trees and the camera stays pretty still. And since the camera doesn't follow him too closely, he often gets partially hidden by those trees, which shows not only that sense of wandering and anxiousness, but also how he is still concealing parts of himself from his mother. And we see that by him literally being partially concealed to us by the trees. Scum always finds like the coolest natural settings within whatever city that they're filming in. So Mateo kicking that tree, I think this shows some growth for Mateo in terms of how he expresses his emotions, because we've seen Mateo get frustrated before, and it usually ends with him throwing things like pretty aggressively. And here we definitely still see some of that frustration coming out through a little bit of physical aggression, but it is way more tempered, right? I mean, that kick was not very aggressive at all. And I think this really could be a result of Mateo opening up to more people and having more of an outlet to express his feelings and his thoughts. So it doesn't just build up and build up and build up and explode like it has before. I adore the fact that Mateo has this private video of them and that it was never released on like Instagram or even like as an extra video that maybe Druck would have released. I know we see a lot of it because we are in Mateo's POV and we do get to see the most intimate parts of him, but I like that it was never released on anything, that it really is Mateo's private special video of them together. And we only get the luxury of seeing bits of it because we are so close to Mateo in this season. And him watching this video is a great way to reflect on how David makes him feel, which is what Hans stressed in their conversation together. We know from this video, from hints throughout the season, and also from Mateo's own words, that David makes him feel understood. And he made him feel that way in their very first conversation, as they started getting to know each other, when they had their first kiss. Even when things were really bad in episode 6, he still talked about David in such a beautiful way with Jonas. So his feelings for David have not changed. Now he still feels understood by David. He still feels all of those beautiful things that he felt for David all the way back. It has been consistent. And this is when Mateo finally realizes, oh, nothing's different. Nothing's different. In terms of my feelings for David, nothing has changed. And this realization finally gives Mateo the confidence to call David. Even if he still has those fears and those anxieties about saying something wrong, he pushes them aside because he's like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm not gonna let that stop me. It has stopped me for days, but he's like, no, not anymore. I'm going to call him. And then calling David, making that leap, also gives Mateo the ability to make that leap regarding his mother as well, which really makes me think that they meant to parallel those two journeys together. And I mentioned how the first clip, I think, is a huge pro for this episode, and I actually really like this clip and the previous clip as well. I think they show a very heartfelt upward trajectory for Mateo in terms of communication. If you take them in a vacuum without all of the other pacing issues with this episode, I think these two clips are really sweet. Yes, it should not have taken him this long to call David, but I really love that it comes from him watching the video and reminiscing about old times and how his feelings for David are the same as they were in that video. And then how him calling David creates a bit of a chain reaction for him to then text his mother about David. So in terms of his mother, He goes from not being able to pick up the phone to calling her but not being able to spit out the words or really say anything of substance, to finally being able to text her saying that he has fallen in love. And then in terms of David, he goes from really being at like an intense loss for words with David after he comes out to indirectly posting a picture about him on Instagram, to texting David some semblance of reassurance, to finally calling him, letting David know that he wants to meet up with him. I do really like how those two journeys parallel each other and they run alongside one another throughout this episode. I think it's a subtle detail and one of the strong points of this episode. Yes, I wish they could have been done better. Specifically, his journey with David, but... So I'm going to try to play as little as possible from this clip. So if some of the video clips that I use seem kind of choppy or awkward, that's why. I do really like how Mateo looks just so sure of himself when he goes to pick David up. But of course, even that is a double-edged sword because we know that they're not going to get a happy moment together before what comes next, which really leaves such a bad taste in my mouth. I know it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And that's not even the worst part of this clip. I do like how Mateo is very open about how he's picking up David. He's like so excited about it that he can't help himself. He has to tell Amita, oh yeah, I'm picking up David. So that's sweet. God, it's so hard to say anything nice about this clip because all of it has like a but, you know, and I do have a but for this one too, because him now being open about his relationship with David does not cancel out the fact that he was still outed by Kiki and Hannah and Mia. So I just want to put that out there as well. And then the very, very, very last thing that I want to talk about, and I'm just going to show the absolute bare minimum of it, is how Mateo's face changes when he realizes what's going on. I just think it's really, really good acting for Michelangelo. And I'm absolutely not going to show anything else, but I will say that I do like the editing and the sound design of the rest of this clip. And that's that. No more of this clip. Please and thank you. So, I'm not completely against an outing storyline as long as it's handled well and respectfully, and that it has a clear point in the narrative. And like I said before, although I don't think the lead-up is executed very well, I do think that they give quite a bit of respect to the aftermath of this outing. They treat it with a lot of weight and the weight that it deserves. And while I do identify as queer, I am still a cisgender woman, and I do not feel equipped to speak more on the outing. So please go look at the Reddit thread and find trans viewers who have talked about this and their experiences and their thoughts. Because who wants to hear about a cis woman talking about this? Not me. So the link is in the description for that. And with that being said, I do have some general ideas about this episode, how the rest of it could have been done better, mainly in terms of pacing as well as David's role in the episode. And I'm going to talk about that in the next part, which you can watch like right now. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear any thoughts that y'all have on anything that I say in this video. I think it's incredibly important. Tell me what's up. Tell me what I've missed, please. Thanks for watching.